You cannot negotiate and you cannot talk to a terrorist organization. This is unrealistic. There's a state fighting against a terrorist organization, fighting against terrorism. And you expect us to sit and talk with terrorists?
Well, they were former allies of the Americans and the British.
That's a pity. If U.S. and British or any other country around the world ally with the terrorists. So we hope that they do have a misunderstanding of who they are. Otherwise, we don't want to consider that any country who ally with us are the allies of terrorists. I just hope that that's not true. I wish that they'll change their policies. That's the only hope I can have for them, indeed.
Would you consider negotiating with the Syrian regime?
Syrian regime is responsible, indeed, from all these atrocities going through entire Syria. Syrian regime is the one who is responsible for those 4 million refugees who live in Turkey. Syrian regime is responsible for all those terror and terrorists, including Daesh and PKK, gaining ground in that country. So why should we sit and talk with such a regime? A regime which have already killed millions of his own citizens.
Mm-hmm. So that's a no?
That's a no.
Okay. So how are we going to get out of this mess? Which, and I'd like to talk about the phone call, the key phone call that changed it all on October the 6th. The Turkish view is that they were implicitly given the green light, the go-ahead by President Trump. Now, ever since that phone call, the Americans seem to be saying that's not what happened. And they're very much blaming the Turkish for provoking a humanitarian crisis, redrawing the map of the Middle East, and creating an unprecedented mayhem in the area.
Of course not. Of course not. There's such a case indeed. We are not redrawing any map. We are, if we talk about the humanitarian case, indeed it's us, Turkey, who provides the humanitarian assistance to all. So we are there for humanitarian reasons.
The Turkish have been accused of bombing a civilian convoy. How is that providing humanitarian assistance?
That's totally a lie. That's not true at all. Just think about the operations that was going through, that happened in Mosul. Do you remember that operation?
I was there.
Do you remember how that operation was held? And do you remember the civilians that were killed throughout that operation? So you were with us, I guess, during the Euphrates Shield operation and Olive Branch operation. So it was like a surgical operation indeed, differentiating the civilians from the terrorists.
That's
so we did destroy.
Sorry to interrupt, but that's impossible. That's impossible to do with the Kurdish groups.
Terrorists, indeed, in that area. Remember, not only PKK terrorists, but Daesh terrorists as well. But we have differentiated them, and that's exactly what we have been doing right now. Indeed, believe me, it's the area, the targeted area for us, the safe zone, the buffer zone for Turkey, clearing up from the terrorists, is just. It's a matter of a couple of days of operation, nothing more than that. The reason it takes more is basically for our humanitarian reasons. We are extremely careful for the civilian casualties, for kids, women, and elderly. Extremely careful.
So what explanation is there then for the bombing of the civilian convoy? Because the colleagues from British channels filmed and talked to these civilians.
I don't have that information indeed. I'll just look into that, but I don't have that information.
Okay. President Erdogan says has written this morning in the Wall Street Journal talking about developing his own plan for northeast Syria. And he's basically said, join our efforts, to all his critics, or begin admitting refugees. Is that a threat? Can you explain more thinking about that?
It's never a threat indeed. So what our allies want is that Turkey is great, and long live Turkey when it comes to keeping the refugees, hosting the refugees in Turkey. Turkey has to receive all the refugees from Syrian side, and Turkey has to keep all the refugees from basically going them through the European side. When it comes to hosting them in Europe, all of a sudden Turkey becomes a bad guy. Well, the reality is that for this 4 million refugees and another 3 million possible ones in Idlib side is a potential refugee issue for Europe as well. So European countries have to stand up and have to take the responsibility, standing by Turkey for helping refugees, for solving refugee issues, for solving the Syrian issue politically, and also for sharing the burden in Turkey. So if this does not happen, Turkey cannot host 4 million refugees and cannot receive another 3 million refugees from the Syrian side for forever. So this is a fact. Sooner or later, these refugees would like to go to the European side because Turkey is not a destination country for forever. So Turkey, Europe is a destination geography as well. So if they want to go to Europe, we can prevent for a certain time what we have done so far, but we cannot do it again forever. So this is not a threat indeed. This is a reality that President Erdogan is just trying to show to our allies.
Can we go on to another subject? You've been criticized by almost everybody, even America, for sparking a humanitarian crisis.
But that's not a humanitarian crisis. Again, I guess I have to correct the concept, like the humanitarian crisis. There is already a humanitarian crisis in the region, in Syria. There is a humanitarian crisis going on for 8 years. There is a humanitarian crisis for 4 million refugees living in Turkey. So just naming it as humanitarian crisis, like our operation as a humanitarian crisis from 10,000 miles away, is easy. Sitting back, having your coffee, and calling it a humanitarian crisis is easy. But what we are talking about is that we are facing two main issues. Refugees issue we are trying to solve, because they would like to get back and live in their own country. They were not able to. They all fled to Turkey from the nearby areas of our southern borders, which right now totally controlled by PKK terrorists. So by clearing them up from that area, they'll be able to get back to their own homeland. They'll be able to live in their homeland. And second, there is a threat, security threat for our own citizens, for our own borders, and we are trying to clear up that threat through clearing up the terrorists, both Daesh and PKK terrorists. So humanitarian crisis is the existing one, so we are trying to reverse the humanitarian crisis, not create a humanitarian crisis.
Okay. Can I ask about your particular allies now, the people, the Syrian National Army that you're backing? There have been a lot of criticisms about the makeup of that group, that their affiliations and links to Al-Qaeda, for instance, possible criminals, convictions. Can I just finish the question?
They
have been videoed executing civilians with hands tied behind their backs. They are being accused of killing the Kurdish leader Hafez Khalaf. What do you say about that?
We have been very, very careful with the NGOs or with all the Syrian people and the Syrian National Army, by every individual, and very careful in terms of none being any type of ties with any radical groups, including Al-Qaeda. Because we are in fight with Al-Qaeda as well, with Daesh. So never, ever we will let such a tie happen in that group indeed. Because we ourselves are fighting against Daesh and Al-Qaeda within our own borders and in Syria as well. So for those videos, we have been investigating them as well. So we will not allow any of those groups to have any type of atrocities. And for the videos, we have been checking into whether that's a reality or some kind of makeup. So we have been investigating into it, and we will never, ever tolerate to that.
And the killing of the Kurdish female leader, I mean, that would be, all of these would be called war crimes.
What we have been fighting with is against a terrorist group. We do not shoot and kill any civilian. Our army will never, ever harm any of the civilians unless he or she is part of the terrorist group belonging to either PKK or Daesh or any other terrorist group in that sense, and fighting against us. Otherwise, we will not harm any civilians at all.
So she would be considered a legitimate target by the Turkish?
I don't have information about the specific case indeed.
Okay. Can we talk about...
if she's involved with the terrorist organization, of course, yes. And if she's in fight against us in the area, within that group, so that might be considered part of, that will not be considered as a civilian issue then. But I'll check into that specific case.
The ISIS prisoners, everyone is concerned about what's happening to all the Islamic State prisoners that are in northeast Syria.
The two issues for the Daesh prisoners, we are trying to take control over the prisons that are within our operation area, Operation Spring area indeed, Peace Spring area. So that's our first goal, to get those prisons under control. The rest is easy. The second, like the one happened yesterday indeed, if they are allowed to go by PKK terrorists. That's exactly what happened yesterday indeed. And that did happen during our Operation Euphrates Shield 2 years back indeed. They did let them go to fight against us. PKK did let the Daesh terrorists go to fight against us. So we did fight, and as I said before, we did destroyed indeed more than 4,000 Daesh terrorists then, and now we will recover them, arrest them, find and arrest them, no matter where they go, no matter where they hide, as long as they are within our borders of a safe zone. So we are not going to let them go.
Can I ask about Manbij? Is the Turkish army, military prepared to take on Assad's men over Manbij? Are you going to fight them?
We hope that's not going to happen, but again, we are determined to get the control over Manbij. Manbij was an area, again, we were there not to control over the area indeed. We were there to provide a safe haven for the local people indeed. Local people are the Arabs over there. So those Arabs right now live in Turkey as refugees. Again, our goal is to let those locals get back to their own homes. The SDF so-called forces are, again, likewise, like the YPG, they are all parts of PKK. They have changed the demography over there by force, forcing the local people out. So right now what we want is let those locals get back to their own homes and live in their own homes. That's the reason we are there. And the promise that was given to Turkey by US was that all those terrorists were going to leave the area within 90 days. So it's been more than 1 year. They have not left yet. So we are there, and we would like to take control of that part.
Even if that means fighting the Syrian regime forces?
Let those locals get back to their own homes, because those people were afraid of the Syrian regime as well.
And that would mean taking on the Syrian regime forces? You would be prepared to do that?
I hope that's not going to be the case. We have been talking with Russia as well. Our ministers and our institutions are in constant talk with all the parts. Again, we hope that that's not going to be the issue, but we are determined to take the control of the area.
So yes, you would take them on.
That's the buffer zone. This is the area. If you remember, this is something that our president has shown in the United Nations. This is the buffer zone indeed, throughout our borders. So most of the refugees living in Turkey, Arabs, Kurds, and Turkmens, Christians, Muslims, mostly came from this area. So they'll be getting back to their own homes and basically restoring the demography over there. The second is that will be a buffer zone for Turkey for the security. So that will be cleared up from the terrorist groups, including Daesh. And
can you explain, are you extending it all the way up to the Iraqi border?
This is where we are right now. This is Tel Abyad, and this is Rasulayn. This is where we are. But again, this is a buffer zone. This is throughout this area. Here is Münbic. It's not an extension. This is something that we have been talking about 30 miles from the border side. So this is exactly the part that we have been talking since the beginning indeed. So what we want from the international arena is some kind of help to create such an environment that refugees would like to get back to that area, rather than basically being against Turkish operation indeed. So the operation that we have been handling is a humanitarian operation. That's the reason we have called the operation as Peace Spring.
Do you think you got the green light from America?
It will bring peace to the region indeed.
Do you think you got the green light from America though? Because they seem to be saying one thing in public and another thing in private to you.
No, we did not ask for permission from anybody indeed, because the conditions that we are in somehow forced us to start this operation indeed. So we have tried to make our case for the entire world, but we were not able to. So we have somehow almost outcried, letting everybody know that this operation will start unless a solution to both cases, the refugee issue and the PKK terrorism and Daesh terrorism, those threats towards Turkey, unless those two issues are resolved, Turkey will start her own operation. So we have made it very clear indeed, and that's what we did, because we were not able to get any help from any part of the world indeed. So right now, I guess it's our right to ask for those countries to stand by with Turkey, rather than basically standing by with a terrorist organization.
Perhaps by marching into Syria, you have opened the doors to Bashar al-Assad reclaiming more parts of Syria, because now they're teamed up with your old enemy, the SDF, and
that's the main reason that we want to be in Münbiç indeed, because for regime to take over Münbiç is not a solution for these refugees, because that Assad himself was the main reason they fled out from Syria, because there were many atrocities over there. So that is the main reason that we want to be there, and will not let anybody to ally with any terrorist organization. So we will be there until the Turkish borders are safe from terrorist threats. And again, we'll be there until we find a solution to our refugee.
To keep it safe, though, that must mean keeping the regime out, from your point of view. Surely.
Of course, the safe zone will be our own Turkish control.
And you'll man that and keep it safe for...
Until a solution is found in Syria indeed. So we do respect Syrian territory. We do respect integrity of the Syrian borders. As Turkey, we are for the unity of the Syria and Syrian borders indeed. So nobody should look for any other goals or objectives as far as this operation is concerned. And we make our objectives very clear again. So we are not going to be there for forever, because it's a huge cost for Turkey as well. So that's for the area's security.
But maybe years you might be there.
Hopefully it's not going to be 4 years. That's the reason I said hopefully this Constitutional Committee will start working as soon as possible, so that a solution will be provided over there, and all the refugees will get back to Syria, and will be just getting back to our own borders.